Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060 with Pioneer Field Agronomist Allie Wise and Josh Schaffner. Here's Josh and Allie.
Good morning, Southeast Minnesota. It's December 2nd, 2020, and this is episode 50. Allie, kind of a milestone there. Been an extremely busy stretch here, even though harvest wrapped up early. A lot of growers making decisions for next year, and you and I have been out kind of making the rounds, following up with growers, talking, how was this year's crop, doing a lot of planning, positioning, and getting some visits in across the area. But I thought today we'd spend a little bit of time, Allie, talking about, what have been some of the common conversations, not so much, what are we out there talking about? What have the growers been asking us, from a question standpoint as they look at planning for next year? I think we'll start with soybeans, Allie, and I'll kind of just pitch this to you. I think one of the common questions we get from everybody is, enlist, extend. A lot of growers really wanting to go to enlist, but also coming off of, I planted 3-4 varieties this year and had a record crop. And do I want to, make a complete change and not planting those varieties again?
Yeah, I agree. I think comparison of trait options on the soybean side in general have been a big topic of conversation and, a very important one, understandably. On the soybean side of thing, I think for starters, I think it's important to note that I get a lot of questions on where we're sitting in terms of supply between extend and enlist. And, lucky for us, we have availability of both of those options that we could offer a person. But I think in general, when I start to dig into that conversation, I think it's also important to note that the difference between enlist and extend, there's a lot of differences in terms of what your specific operation needs. So I think for starters, it's just important to identify, when we look at those goals at the end of harvest in terms of those factors that are driving yield, I think you need to first vet between, what is maybe holding me back the most? Has it been the disease package in general, some of the pressure of STS or white mold in the past, historically that has thrown me off? Or has it been some of the weed control side of things that's maybe setting me back? And I like to just start there in terms of what is our biggest need between weed control and maybe disease pressure, and then start to work ourselves down between the pro and con of enlist and extend. As you look at that conversation, Josh, where's maybe the first place that your mind tends to go?
Yeah, it's very similar approach to you, and really what it boils down to is really putting together. We need more than one variety. We really, in some cases, we need to look at what's important. Is it white mold, STS? Now, on the flip side, if we have growers that are really struggling with weed control, and that's their biggest factor, enlist is extremely attractive. The weed control system there, I think a majority of growers would prefer the application and working with that label and the flexibility of it. But on the flip side, when we're looking at, we still got to put bushels in the tank. And if we have different concerns, if we're happy with weed control, in some cases, taking a look at what the options are, you might be able to build a better package for the operation of having 3-4 different varieties that really fit the mold. And sometimes on the list, we just don't have as much data and it's not as proven. And, some producers that know these varieties know how to manage them, and coming off record yields is probably keeping some growers in that camp. Still some uncertainty on the weed control, which this could really change, depending on, what the state label looks like, which I think we're still awaiting that. I haven't seen that yet, Allie. We've seen the federal side of it, but we're still waiting for the state of Minnesota to give us the guidance on the new dicamba label, which could have an impact on what direction we go as well. But those have been some of the big things, and we've had some good conversations about that. And there's a lot of growers going to enlist. There's some staying extend, which is great. But like you said, we're just fortunate that we got a great portfolio of both options there, and it puts us in a good spot. Allie, another thing, we've talked about early beans versus late maturity. We've talked about this in other episodes. Another thing that still comes up quite a bit from some growers. What have some of your conversations around kind of picking our maturities been like this fall, early winter?
I think that's been an interesting conversation because you go back to before we had harvested beans, you and I kind of had a conversation on, are the early beans or are the later maturities going to be a little bit better? You look at the early maturity beans, they packed on so many flowers early and had really nice pod set all the way to the top. And some of the later beans just kind of got hit in some of that stressier period and maybe didn't fill all those pods all the way to the top. But I think, generally those late rains, they really worked wonders on the soybean crop in general. I think if I look on the early maturity beans, I still think that approach to using them in your system is that early maturity bean planted early still paid in a huge way, both yield wise and just management wise, in terms of getting started on something in the month of early September. But I think, later maturity wise, I think those that we were able to keep healthy enough to take much more advantage of those rains that we were able to capture later in August just added a lot in terms of weight of grain to those beans and kept us from having a bunch of BBs that we were harvesting this fall. What was kind of your take between the two?
Yeah, I've had a couple of different angles to this conversation on some producers that did some early beans and some full season. And one observation I ran into a couple of times was I had some questions around, the planting order. I had some producers that had some really early beans, like a 1011, and they planted the late beans first and finished with the early. Now everything was early this year, which in some cases kind of brought everything ready at the same time. And my only encouragement, if we're going to look at the early beans planted early, that we always plant early beans first and finish with late ones. So if you're going to plant a 1-1, a 1-5, and a 2-0, I would plant them in that order. And really, when you look at the harvest plan, we want to get them harvested right when they get ripe. So when the 1-1's ready, boom, get them. Then the 1-5's ready, then the 2-1s. And that's just a strategy to maximize, yield and productivity across the operation. And Allie, when we come back from break, we'll jump in and talk about some of these common corn conversations.